Hi, it's Bobby with Hitchdock Outdoors, and today we're going to be assembling the Eagle Universal Push Tube. This push tube comes in two sizes, an ATV one and a UTV one. All of the components, the hardware, the assembly is all the same between both versions, except that the ATV push tubes are slightly shorter than the UTV push tubes. All of your hardware comes in one bag. On the back is a part number for reference if you ever needed additional hardware from us. And then it also says that it's the ATV UTV arm hardware kit, so that is how you know this is what we will be using to assemble the push tube. I've already opened a bag and pre-separated it into our steps 1 through 4 for quick assembly, so I'm going to set this off to the side. To begin, we're going to take our top plate, which is this triangle shaped piece that has some bent flanges and inner flanges bent up, and place it face down. Then we're going to grab a push tube. For this version, I'm going to use an ATV push tube. There's a notch on one end, and then there's an end that has a series of holes. We're going to put the notched end face down inside of here, and the end of this tube will line up close with the end of this flange. Same thing for the opposite side. When you're assembling these, you'll want to make sure that the push arms come out to be slightly parallel at the end. All right, we're going to grab our hardware, which are 6 5/16 by 2.5 inch bolts, 12 flat washers, and 6 5/16 nylock nuts. Put a flat washer on each bolt, and then we will start by putting them in the holes at the ends of the push tube. Place a flat washer on the inside, and then just start the nylock nut finger tight. We will fully tighten everything when we are all done. Now for the next part, we're going to take the center brace, which looks like this, and we're going to place it in between the two push arms. Where these last set, there's 2 holes here and 1 here. You'll notice there's only 1 hole on the inside of the push tube, where there's actually 2 holes in the outer plate. This is for ground clearance. If you have a machine that has 11.5 inches or less of ground clearance, we are going to use the bottom hole, which in this case, since we're upside down, is the top hole. If you have a machine that has 11.5 inches or more of ground clearance, we suggest starting in the top hole, or in this case, the bottom hole, since we are upside down. At any point, these can be changed, whether the blade is installed or not, the whole push tube's together. Even when it's on your machine, you can remove this bolt on each side and adjust the push tube height if you need to adjust it. The reason we allow for this adjustment is to allow you to keep the blade level when you are plowing. I'm going to be using the bottom hole because I have a machine that's 11.5 inches or less, but again, it's the top hole because we are upside down. So this bolt will go through there, and then through this first slot on the center brace. Place a flat washer on the inside, followed by a nylock nut. Be sure that you install the bolt in the same location on both sides to keep the push tube even. The last 2 will just go in this last hole in the push tube that goes straight through to the center brace. All right. For step 2, we're going to flip the push tube over. and turn it away from us because we will be working with this end. And we're going to grab our attachment plate that looks like this, and it will go with the slots here facing me. Put the push tubes on the inside of it. And then pull it until the push tube is approximately flush with the end of the bracket. The multiple holes in this push tube allow you to change where this attachment bracket is located. If you need more or less tire clearance, you can always move this a hole or two forward or backwards, but we always suggest starting with it in the holes that are flush with the back. So we're going to take the first 5/16 by 2 1/4 inch bolt and place it in this outer hole here. Notice there are two, one directly below the slot and one off to the side, and we will be using the one off to the side where this goes. And then just start a 5/16 serrated nut on the inside, just finger tight. Repeat for the opposite side. Now I'm going to flip the push tube on its side, and you will see that there's a set of holes here and a set of holes on the back or the bottom of the attachment plate. Those are where the last two on each side will go. The nut will go on the bottom. All right, then we will flip the push tube over again. And the last part of step 2 is to install our quick latch brackets, which are these silver pieces. So in this step, we're going to use a 5/16 by 3 1/2 inch bolt, 2 5/16 flat washers, 2 of the springs in the hardware kit, and 2 nylock nuts. So you'll begin by putting a flat washer on the 3 1/2 inch bolt and placing it through the slot in the bottom of the quick latch bracket. Now we will use this other hole on the outside of the push tube to go all the way through. On the inside of the push tube, we're going to put the spring, a flat washer, and just start the nylock nut. Now we repeat for the other side. Now we will grab a 1/2 inch socket, and then I'm going to use the impact for this, but you can use whatever, and then a 1/2 inch wrench. You could also use a ratchet. And we want to just snug these up so that this is not so floppy, but it's still able to pull away. See how it's not so floppy? I'm still able to pull it away. I have maybe 1/8 to 3/16 of the bolt sticking through the end of the nylock nut. Let's repeat for the other side. Same thing. Now it's not so floppy, still able to pull away. All right, for step 3, we're going to pivot the push tube around, and then we're going to install our swivel. So this is the swivel. We'll place it on top of our push tube. I'm going to slide it off to the edge a little bit so I have a little bit of room. Then we're going to use the swivel top plate and place it over as well and line up the large hole at the bottom of it with the hole in the swivel and the hole in the push tube. In this step, we're going to be using the 5/8 by 1.5 inch bolt and just place it down through both holes and just start a 5/16 nylock nut on the bottom. Next, we will grab our winch hook bracket and we're going to sandwich this between the swivel top plate and the top plate of the push tube. This can be pivoted off to the side for a moment and it angles back towards the rear of the push tube. One thing to note is we need to place 2 5/16 flat washers on top of here. That allows the swivel to have a little bit of space. If we didn't have these in here and tightened this down, the swivel would not be able to fully rotate. And if you find that problem, you may have skipped this step. So now we will put that over top. And then we will be using 2 5/16 by 1.25 inch carriage bolts, followed by a 5/16 flat washer and nylock nut on the bottom. I'm going to do this first one and then I will pivot it up so you can see. All right. Now I'll place the other bolt. Then we can pivot this up. And then we will do a 5/16 flat washer and our last 5/16 nylock nut for this step. Now we will grab a 15/16 wrench and a 15/16 socket, either on an impact or on a ratchet. And we are going to tighten this 5/8 bolt that we placed, that the swivel pivots on, enough that the swivel can still rotate fully all directions. Okay, there we go. It goes both ways. Not much wobble. Can always be tightened more later. We're also going to fully tighten the 5/16 carriage bolts that we put on here. So I'm going to use a 1/2 inch socket and an impact. You could also use a ratchet or a wrench. All right, the next step is we'll install our pivot lock, which looks like this. Place it on top of the swivel top plate, down into the notches. You may have to rotate your swivel a little bit so that it is situated correctly, so that it drops all the way down. And then these bent flanges should fit inside on the back. We'll grab our hinge bushing. And then in this step, we're going to use a 1/4 by 3.25 inch bolt on the inside, followed by a 1/4 inch nylock. So we'll place the hinge bushing on the inside, which I find is easiest to do one from each side of the flange. All the way through and out the other side. Now we'll put the nylock nut on, and we will use a 7/16 wrench and socket to tighten this up enough that this is still able to move. There we go. Now we're going to take the long 3/8 by 3.5 inch carriage bolt. Pull the push tube off the table a little, slide it up in the hole that's on the center of the top plate, all the way up through the pivot lock. Then we will place a 3/8 flat washer on top, followed by the last spring that was in the hardware kit, and then start a 3/8 serrated flange nut on top, finger tight, so that the nut is almost flush with the end of the bolt. Now we will test and see if we're able to pick this up and rotate the swivel, which we are. Notice once you get past being locked in, you can let go of this, and as you keep rotating, it will automatically pull it down to lock it into place. Now we're going to install our blade pivot stops on the swivel using the last 3/8 by 1 1/4 inch bolts that are in our kit. Place the bolt through the blade stop, through the hole on the side of the swivel, and start a 3/8 nylock nut on the outside. Repeat for the other side, and we will be leaving these loose until the blade is installed on the machine. All right, now for the last step, we will tighten down the 6 bolts that we left loose during steps 1 and 2. So for that, we'll need a 1/2 inch socket, and we're gonna flip this over. For these ones down here, we'll also need a 1/2 inch wrench, and we can snug these all the way up. Now for this end, since these were serrated flange, we can just hang on to the nut with our hand and tighten it down, or you can also use the wrench. And that's how you assemble the Eagle Talon Universal Mount Push Tube. If you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to us by emailing info@hitchdockoutdoors.com.